The woman sat in the dirt beside the freshly turned earth, her black dress pooled around her like spilled ink, and she had not moved since dawn broke over the Sierra Nevada mountains. Xavier Frost reined in his horse on the road that cut through the cemetery on the outskirts of San Francisco, California, and something in the stillness of her posture made him stop. It was late September in 1878, and the fog that rolled in from the bay each morning had burned away to reveal a cloudless sky, but the woman looked cold despite the warmth, her shoulders hunched forward as though she were trying to fold herself into nothing. He had been riding back from a cattle drive that had taken him north into Oregon Territory, and he was dusty, tired, and looking forward to a hot meal in a bed that did not shift beneath him, but he could not ride past her. Xavier dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud that seemed too loud in the quiet of the cemetery. He was 26 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of creek water. He'd grown up on a ranch outside Sacramento, learning to rope and brand before he could write his own name, and he had seen grief before. He had buried friends, family, horses he had loved like brothers. But there was something about this woman that pulled at him, something raw and exposed that made him feel like he was intruding on a private wound. He approached slowly, his hat in his hands, and when he was close enough to speak without shouting, he said, "Madam, are you all right?" She did not look up. Her hands were clasped in her lap, and he could see that her knuckles were white, the skin stretched tight over bone. Her hair was dark brown, almost black, and it was pinned up in a way that might have been neat that morning but had come loose in places, tendrils falling around her face. She was young, he realized, probably not much older than 20, and her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. "Madam," he said again, softer this time. "He's gone," she said, and her voice was hoarse, as though she had been screaming or crying or both. "My brother, Samuel, he is gone." Xavier looked at the grave she sat beside. The headstone was simple, the kind that could be ordered from a stonemason in town for a few dollars, and the inscription was brief. Samuel Andrew, born 1855, died 1878, beloved son and brother. 23 years old, Xavier calculated, just a few years younger than himself. "I'm sorry for your loss," Xavier said, and he meant it. The words felt inadequate, too small for the size of her grief, but he did not know what else to say. "Everyone says that," she said, and there was no anger in her voice, only a flatness that was somehow worse. "They say they are sorry, and then they leave, and I am still here, and he is still gone." Xavier looked around the cemetery. There were other graves nearby, some old and weathered, some new. In the distance he could see the sprawl of San Francisco, the buildings climbing the hills, the masts of ships crowding the harbor. The city had grown fast since the gold rush, swelling with people chasing dreams of fortune, and it was still growing, still hungry. But here, in this quiet place, none of that seemed to matter. "How long have you been sitting here?" Xavier asked. "Since this morning," she said. "Before that I was at home, but I could not stand it. Everyone looking at me with pity, my mother weeping, my father staring at the wall. I needed to be here." Xavier crouched down beside her, his knees protesting the movement. He was not sure what he was doing, only that he could not leave her like this. "Do you have water?" he asked. She shook her head. He went back to his horse and retrieved his canteen, then returned and held it out to her. She stared at it for a long moment, as though she could not quite understand what it was, and then she took it with trembling hands and drank. When she handed it back, her eyes met his for the first time, and he saw the depth of the pain there, a kind of agony that made his chest tighten. "My name is Xavier Frost," he said. "I'm a cowboy mostly. I work ranches, drive cattle. I was passing through when I saw you." "Beatrice Andrews," she said. "My family owns a dry goods store on Market Street." "How did your brother die?" Xavier asked, and then immediately wished he had not, because the question seemed too intrusive, too bold. But Beatrice did not seem to mind. If anything, she looked relieved to have someone ask, as though she had been waiting for permission to speak. "Fever," she said. "It came on fast. One day he was fine, laughing, making plans to go to the theater. The next day he could not get out of bed. 3 days later, he was dead. The doctor said there was nothing to be done. It just took him." Xavier had seen fevers take people before. They were common enough, especially in cities where people lived close together, sharing air and water and sickness. But that did not make it any easier to accept. "He was my best friend," Beatrice continued, and her voice broke on the last word. "We were only a year apart, and we did everything together. He was kind and funny, and he made me feel like the world was not so frightening. And now he is gone. And I do not know how to be in a world without him." Xavier sat down in the dirt beside her, not caring that it would ruin his trousers. "I lost my younger sister when I was 18, he said. "She was kicked by a horse, died instantly. For months afterward, I would turn to tell her something, or I would hear a laugh that sounded like hers, and for a second, I would forget she was gone. And then I would remember, and it felt like losing her all over again." Beatrice turned to look at him, really look at him, and he saw a flicker of something in her eyes that might have been recognition or understanding. "Does it get easier?" she asked. "It gets different," Xavier said. "The pain does not go away, but it changes shape. It becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you." They sat in silence for a while, and Xavier watched the light shift across the cemetery, turning the grass golden. He should have been riding on, should have been finding a place to stable his horse and clean himself up, but he stayed. Something told him that Beatrice needed someone to sit with her, to bear witness to her grief, and he found that he did not mind being that person. "Tell me about him," Xavier said eventually. "Tell me about Samuel." Beatrice hesitated, and then she began to speak. She told him about how Samuel had loved books, how he would read to her when they were children, doing different voices for all the characters. She told him about the time he had saved up his money to buy her a new dress for her birthday, even though it meant going without new boots for himself. She told him about his dreams of becoming a lawyer, of making a difference in the world, and how he had been studying at night after working all day in the store. Xavier listened, asking questions when she paused, encouraging her to keep going. He learned that Samuel had been passionate about justice, that he had volunteered to help immigrants who arrived in the city with nothing, teaching them English and helping them find work. He learned that Samuel had a terrible singing voice but sang anyway, loud and off-key, because it made Beatrice laugh. He learned that Beatrice had loved her brother with a fierceness that was still burning, even in the midst of her grief. The sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and still they sat. Xavier told Beatrice about his own life, about growing up on the ranch, about the first time he had roped a calf and the pride he had felt when his father had clapped him on the shoulder. He told her about the drives, about sleeping under the stars and waking with Frost on his bedroll, about the satisfaction of honest work and the beauty of the open range. "Why did you stop?" Beatrice asked. "Why did you not just ride past?" Xavier considered the question. "I do not know," he said honestly. "Maybe because you looked like I felt when my sister died, like the world had ended, and you were the only one who noticed." "It feels that way," Beatrice said, "like everything should have stopped, like the sun should not rise and the birds should not sing, and people should not go about their business as though nothing has changed. But they do. The world keeps turning, and I do not know how to turn with it." "You do not have to know yet," Xavier said. "You just have to keep breathing, one breath at a time. And then one day, you will realize that you have been breathing for a whole day without thinking about it, and then a whole week. And the pain will still be there, but you will be living around it instead of inside it." Beatrice closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her cheeks. "I do not want to live without him," she whispered. "I know," Xavier said, "but he would want you to. From everything you have told me, it sounds like he loved you very much. And people who love us do not want us to stop living when they are gone. They want us to keep going, to find joy, to honor them by living well." "How do you know?" Beatrice asked, opening her eyes to look at him. "Because that is what I would want," Xavier said. "If I died tomorrow, I would want the people I love to keep living. To remember me, yes, but not to let grief consume them. I would want them to laugh and love and see the sunrise. I would want them to live." Beatrice nodded slowly, and Xavier saw a shift in her expression, as though something had settled inside her. It was not acceptance, not yet, but it was a step toward it. It was the beginning of understanding that she could survive this, even if she did not know how yet. "It is getting dark," Xavier said gently. "Let me walk you home." Beatrice looked at the grave one more time, and then she placed her hand on the earth, her palm flat against the soil. "I will come back tomorrow," she said, speaking to Samuel as though he could hear her. "And the day after that. I will not forget you. I promise." She stood, and Xavier stood with her, steadying her when she swayed. She had been sitting for so long that her legs had gone stiff, and he offered her his arm. She took it, leaning on him more than she probably wanted to, and together they walked through the cemetery toward the road where his horse waited. Xavier helped her onto the horse, and then he swung up behind her, his arms around her to hold the reins. She was stiff at first, uncomfortable with the proximity, but then she relaxed, letting herself lean back against him. He could feel the exhaustion radiating from her, the way her body had gone heavy with it. They rode through the streets of San Francisco, past saloons and hotels, past storefronts and houses, past people going about their evening routines. The city was alive with sound and light, but inside the bubble of their shared silence, it all felt distant, muted. "It's the one with the green shutters," Beatrice said as they turned onto Market Street, and Xavier guided the horse to a stop in front of a 2-story building with a shop on the ground floor and living quarters above. The sign above the door read Andrews Dry Goods, and through the window, Xavier could see shelves stocked with fabric and thread, barrels of flour and sugar, tools and tinware. He dismounted and then helped Beatrice down, his hands on her waist. She swayed again, and he steadied her, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," Beatrice said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "You did not have to do that. You did not have to stay with me, but you did, and I will not forget it." "It was nothing," Xavier said, though they both knew it was not. "Will you come back?" Beatrice asked, and there was something vulnerable in her expression, something that told him how much the question cost her to ask. "If you want me to," Xavier said. "I do," Beatrice said. "I do not know why, but I do." "Then I will," Xavier said. "Tomorrow, if that is all right." "Tomorrow," Beatrice agreed, and then she turned and walked to the door. She paused before going inside, looking back at him one more time, and then she disappeared into the building. Xavier stood there for a moment, staring at the door, and then he mounted his horse and rode away. He found a stable a few blocks over and paid to have his horse cared for, and then he walked to a boarding house he had stayed at before. The proprietor remembered him and gave him a room on the second floor, small and plain but clean. Xavier washed up as best he could with the basin and pitcher provided, and then he lay down on the bed, still fully clothed. He was tired, bone-tired, but his mind would not settle. He kept thinking about Beatrice, about the way she had looked sitting beside that grave, about the rawness in her voice when she spoke of her brother. He kept thinking about the way she had leaned against him on the ride into the city, the way she had trusted him even though they were strangers. He did not understand why he felt so drawn to her, why her grief had affected him so deeply. He had seen plenty of people mourning, had attended funerals and wakes, had offered condolences and moved on. But something about Beatrice was different. Maybe it was because she reminded him of himself at 18, lost and broken after his sister died. Maybe it was because she had not tried to hide her pain, had not put on a brave face, or pretended to be stronger than she was. She had been honest, and he respected that. Xavier closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but it was a long time before he managed it, and even then, his dreams were full of cemeteries and women with dark hair and eyes full of sorrow. The next morning, Xavier woke early and went to a bathhouse, paying for a proper bath and a shave. He had his clothes cleaned and pressed, and by the time he was finished, he looked almost respectable. He bought breakfast from a street vendor, eating quickly, and then he walked to Andrews Dry Goods. The shop was already open, and when he stepped inside, a bell above the door jingled. The interior smelled of coffee and sawdust, of new fabric and leather, and it was cool compared to the warmth of the street. Behind the counter stood a man in his late 40s, with thinning hair and spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up when Xavier entered, and his expression was wary. "Can I help you?" the man asked. "I'm looking for Beatrice Andrews," Xavier said. "I'm a friend." The man's expression softened slightly, though the wariness did not entirely leave. "You are the one who brought her home last night?" "Yes, sir," Xavier said. "I found her at the cemetery. I wanted to make sure she was all right." The man studied Xavier for a long moment, and then he nodded. "I am Robert Andrews, Beatrice's father. I want to thank you for looking after my daughter." She has been struggling since Samuel's death. We all have, but Beatrice especially. They were very close. She told me, Xavier said. I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you, Robert said, and he looked tired, the kind of tired that came from grief and sleepless nights. Beatrice is upstairs. I will tell her you are here. Robert disappeared through a door behind the counter, and Xavier waited, looking around the shop. It was well stocked and organized, the kind of place that served the needs of miners and ranchers, families and businessmen. A few minutes later, Beatrice appeared, and Xavier felt his breath catch. She looked better than she had the day before, though she was still pale, still hollow-eyed. She wore a simple dress of dark blue, and her hair was pinned up neatly. When she saw Xavier, a small smile touched her lips, and it transformed her face. You came, she said. I said I would, Xavier replied. Would you like to walk with me? Beatrice asked. I was about to go to the market. I would be honored, Xavier said. They left the shop together, and Robert watched them go with an expression Xavier could not quite read. Outside, the city was coming alive, merchants opening their shops, wagons rolling down the streets, people hurrying to and fro. Beatrice led Xavier through the crowds with practiced ease, and he followed, content to let her set the pace. How are you feeling? Xavier asked. Raw, Beatrice said honestly, like my skin has been peeled back and everything hurts. But also better than yesterday. You helped with that. Talking about Samuel, remembering the good things. It helped. I am glad, Xavier said. They walked to the market, a sprawling open-air affair where vendors sold everything from fresh produce to live chickens to bolts of silk imported from China. Beatrice moved through the stalls with purpose, selecting vegetables and fruit, negotiating prices with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. Xavier carried her purchases and they talked, the conversation flowing easily between them. Beatrice asked about his work, and he told her about the ranches he had worked, about the drive to Oregon, and the challenges of keeping a herd together through rough terrain. She asked about the animals, and he told her about his favorite horse, a bay mare named Clementine, who had carried him thousands of miles and never once thrown him. In turn, Xavier asked about the shop, and Beatrice told him about the customers, about the challenge of keeping inventory balanced and prices fair. She told him about the satisfaction of helping someone find exactly what they needed, about the relationships her family had built over the years with miners and farmers, seamstresses and carpenters. Samuel was supposed to take over the shop one day, Beatrice said as they walked back toward Market Street, their arms full of parcels. My father always said he had a head for business, but Samuel wanted more than that. He wanted to help people in a bigger way. He wanted to change things. What do you want? Xavier asked. Beatrice looked surprised, as though no one had ever asked her that question before. I do not know, she said slowly. I always assumed I would marry, have children, help with the shop. That is what women do, is it not? Some women, Xavier said, but not all. I have known women who ran ranches, who drove wagons across the country, who owned businesses and made their own way. The world is changing, Beatrice. Women are changing it. I do not think I am brave enough for that, Beatrice said. I think you are braver than you know, Xavier said. You are still standing, even after losing your brother. That takes courage. Beatrice looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that made Xavier's heart beat faster. You have a way of saying things that make me believe them, she said softly. They reached the shop, and Xavier helped her carry the parcels inside. Robert was helping a customer, a weathered miner buying supplies, and he nodded to them as they entered. Beatrice led Xavier upstairs to the living quarters, a comfortable space with a sitting room, a kitchen, and several bedrooms. A woman was in the kitchen, her back to them as she stirred something on the stove, and when she turned, Xavier saw that she had the same dark hair and fine features as Beatrice. Mama, this is Xavier Frost, Beatrice said. He is the one who helped me yesterday. The woman, who could only be Beatrice's mother, set down her spoon and came forward. Her eyes were red and swollen, just like Beatrice's had been, and she looked fragile, as though a strong wind might blow her away. But her smile was warm as she took Xavier's hand. Thank you, she said, and her voice trembled. Thank you for bringing my daughter home. I do not know what I would have done if something had happened to her too. It was my honor, madam, Xavier said. Beatrice is very strong. She is, her mother agreed, looking at Beatrice with pride. She has always been strong, like her brother. They had lunch together, the three of them, and Xavier learned more about the Andrews family. He learned that they had come to California from Pennsylvania in 1855, drawn by the promise of opportunity in the booming city. He learned that Robert had worked as a clerk before saving enough money to open his own shop, and that it had been a struggle at first, but they had persevered. He learned that Beatrice's mother, Catherine, had been a teacher before she married, and that she had taught both her children to read and write before they were old enough for school. After lunch, Xavier and Beatrice went for another walk, this time toward the waterfront. They walked along the docks, watching the ships come and go, the sailors and dock workers going about their business. The air smelled of salt and fish, of tar and rope, and gulls wheeled overhead crying out in harsh voices. "I used to come here with Samuel," Beatrice said, staring out at the water. "He loved the ships. He would talk about traveling, about seeing the world, China, Europe, South America. He wanted to go everywhere, do everything." "And you?" Xavier asked. "Did you want to travel?" "I wanted to go wherever he went," Beatrice said. "I did not care about the destination, only that we were together. Does that make me foolish?" "No," Xavier said. "It makes you loving. There is no shame in that." They stood in silence for a while, and then Beatrice said, "I keep expecting him to appear, to come around a corner or call my name. And then I remember, and it is like a door slamming shut. He's never going to appear. I am never going to hear his voice again. I'm never going to see him smile or hear him laugh. He is gone, and I have to accept that, but I do not know how." "You do not have to accept it all at once," Xavier said. "You can take it in small pieces, accept it for 1 hour, and then let yourself forget for a while, and then accept it for another hour. And eventually, the hours will turn into days, and the days will turn into weeks, and it will become a part of you instead of something you have to work at." Beatrice looked at him, and there were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. "You are very wise, Xavier Frost." "I am not wise," Xavier said. "I just understand grief. I have been where you are." "And where are you now?" Beatrice asked. Xavier thought about that. "Somewhere on the other side," he said. "I still miss my sister. I still think about her. But I can remember the good times without feeling like I am drowning. And I can see beauty in the world again. I can laugh and love and live, and I know she would be happy about that." "I want to get there," Beatrice said. "I want to feel that way. Will you help me?" "I will do whatever I can," Xavier promised. Over the next few weeks, Xavier and Beatrice spent nearly every day together. He had intended to move on, to find work on one of the ranches outside the city, but he could not bring himself to leave. Not yet. Not while Beatrice still needed him. They developed a routine. In the mornings, Xavier would come to the shop, and Beatrice would take a break from helping her father. They would walk through the city, exploring neighborhoods and parks, markets and theaters. They would talk about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams, fears and hopes. Sometimes they would visit the cemetery, and Beatrice would sit by Samuel's grave and talk to him, telling him about her day, about Xavier, about how hard she was trying to keep going. Xavier found work doing odd jobs around the city, things that paid enough to cover his room and board, and left him free to spend time with Beatrice. He repaired fences and roofs, loaded wagons at the docks, helped with roundups on the small ranches that still existed on the outskirts of the city. It was not the life he had imagined for himself, but he did not mind. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. As the weeks passed, Xavier began to notice small changes in Beatrice. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely. The hollow look in her eyes began to fade, replaced by something brighter, something that looked like hope. She started to talk about the future, tentatively at first, and then with more confidence. She talked about helping to expand the shop, about maybe starting a lending library on the side, something Samuel would have loved. She talked about learning to ride a horse, about seeing more of California, about not letting fear keep her small. And Xavier found himself falling in love. It was not sudden, not a lightning strike or a thunderclap. It was gradual, a slow unfolding, like a flower opening to the sun. It was in the way she tilted her head when she listened to him, really listened, as though his words mattered. It was in the way she laughed, full and unrestrained, when he told her stories about his misadventures on the trail. It was in the way she touched his arm when she wanted to make a point, the the way she trusted him with her grief and her joy, the way she looked at him sometimes, as though she was seeing something she had not expected to find. Xavier did not tell her how he felt. He did not want to rush her, did not want to take advantage of her vulnerability. She was healing, and that was what mattered. If his feelings remained unspoken, if they remained only his to carry, that was all right. He would rather have her friendship than risk losing her by pushing for more. But then one day in late October, as they walked through Golden Gate Park, Beatrice stopped suddenly and turned to face him. "Xavier," she said, and there was something in her voice that made his pulse quicken. "Yes," he said. "I need to tell you something," she said, and she looked nervous, her hands twisting together. "I've been thinking about it for a while, and I need to say it before I lose my courage." "You can tell me anything," Xavier said. Beatrice took a deep breath. "I'm grateful for everything you have done for me," she said. "You saved me, Xavier, not just that first day, but every day since. You sat with me through the hardest hours. You listened when I needed to talk, and you were silent when I needed silence. You made me laugh when I thought I would never laugh again. You made me believe that I could survive this, that I could live again. And somewhere along the way, you became more than a friend to me." Xavier's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. "Beatrice," he said, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Let me finish," she said. "I know it has only been a few weeks. I know it might seem too soon, too fast. But grief has a way of stripping away all the pretense, all the things we tell ourselves we should feel or should do. And what I am left with is the truth. And the truth is that I have feelings for you, Xavier. Romantic feelings, and I do not know what to do about that because I do not want to dishonor Samuel's memory, but I also cannot deny what I feel." Xavier reached out and took her hands in his, and they were trembling. "Beatrice," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion, "you are not dishonoring Samuel. You are living the way he would want you to, and I have feelings for you too. I have had them for a while now. I just did not want to say anything because I did not want to make things harder for you." "You could never make things harder," Beatrice said, and there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. "You make everything easier. You make everything better." Xavier pulled her close, and she came willingly, resting her head against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, and he felt her relax against him, felt her breathe out a long, shuddering sigh. "I do not know what the future holds," Beatrice said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I do not know what shape this takes or where it goes. But I know I want you in my life, Xavier. I know I want to see where this leads." "So do I," Xavier said, and he pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "So do I." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the middle of the park, and Xavier felt something settle inside him, something that felt like peace, like rightness. He had not been looking for love when he rode into San Francisco. He had been looking for a bed and a meal, a place to rest before moving on to the next job, the next town. But he had found something infinitely more valuable. He had found Beatrice. After that day, their relationship shifted. They were no longer just friends, though friendship remained the foundation of what they were building. They were courting, officially and openly, with the blessing of Beatrice's parents, who had watched Xavier with approval over the past weeks and had seen how much he cared for their daughter. Xavier began to spend evenings with the Andrews family, sharing meals and conversation. He grew close to Robert, who appreciated Xavier's work ethic and honesty, and to Catherine, who saw in Xavier a steadiness and kindness that reminded her of her own husband. They talked about Samuel often, keeping his memory alive through stories and laughter, and Xavier was glad that they did not try to hide their grief or pretend it did not exist. In November, the weather turned colder, and fog rolled in from the bay more frequently, blanketing the city in a damp chill. Xavier and Beatrice bundled up in coats and scarves and continued their walks, their breath visible in the air. They held hands now, their fingers entwined, and sometimes Xavier would steal a kiss when they thought no one was looking, quick and sweet, and Beatrice would blush and laugh. One evening, as they sat in the parlor of the Andrews home, a fire crackling in the hearth, Robert cleared his throat and looked at Xavier. "I have a proposition for you," Robert said. Xavier looked up, curious. "Sir?" "I am getting older," Robert said. And with Samuel gone, I do not have anyone to help me run the shop. Beatrice does what she can, and she's very good at it, but it is too much for one person. I need someone I can trust, someone who understands hard work and fair dealing. I would like to offer you a job, Xavier, a permanent job with a salary and a place in this family if you want it. Xavier glanced at Beatrice, who was smiling, her eyes bright with hope. I would be honored, sir, Xavier said, but I do not know much about running a shop. I'm a cowboy. You can learn, Robert said, and what you do not know about inventory and bookkeeping, we can teach you. What matters is character, and you have that in spades. Then I accept, Xavier said, and he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had been wondering how he could stay in San Francisco, how he could build a life here with Beatrice, and now the path was clear. Xavier moved into a room above the shop, a small space that had once been used for storage but was quickly cleaned and furnished. He threw himself into learning the business, working long hours alongside Robert and Beatrice, mastering the details of ordering and pricing, customer service and accounting. It was different from ranch work, required a different kind of skill, but he found that he enjoyed it. He liked the satisfaction of helping a customer find what they needed, the challenge of making the numbers balance at the end of the day, the sense of being part of something larger than himself. As winter settled over San Francisco, Xavier and Beatrice grew closer. They talked about their future, about the life they wanted to build together. Beatrice confessed that she had always dreamed of having a family, of filling a home with laughter and love. Xavier admitted that he had always wanted a place to belong, a place where he was not just passing through. They talked about marriage, tentatively at first, and then with growing certainty. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell lightly outside, a rare occurrence in San Francisco, Xavier took Beatrice to the cemetery. It was evening, and the world was quiet, muffled by the snow. They stood beside Samuel's grave, and Xavier could see that Beatrice had been crying, but her tears were not only of sadness. There was something else there, something bittersweet. I want to tell him, Beatrice said. I want him to know. Then tell him, Xavier said gently. Beatrice knelt in the snow, her hand on the headstone. Samuel, she said, her voice steady, I want you to know that I'm going to be all right. I'm going to live the way you wanted me to. I'm going to be happy. Xavier has asked me to marry him, and I said yes. I know you would like him. He is kind and good, and he makes me feel safe. He sat with me through the hardest hours, Samuel. He did not leave when things were difficult. He stayed. And I love him. I love him the way you love Julia, that girl you never had the courage to tell. I am not going to make the same mistake. I am going to live fully, love fully, and I'm going to carry you with me, always. You are not forgotten. You are not gone, not really. You are in every good thing I do, every kind word I speak, every moment of joy I find. You are my brother, and you always will be. Xavier knelt beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and they stayed like that for a long time, the snow falling around them, the city silent and still. And Xavier felt, in that moment, that Samuel was there with them, that his presence was a benediction, a blessing on the life they were about to build. They married in the spring of 1879, on a day when the hills around San Francisco were green and wildflowers bloomed in riotous color. The ceremony was small, held in the same church where Samuel's funeral had been, and attended by family and a few close friends. Beatrice wore a dress of white lace, and Xavier wore a new suit, and when they said their vows, their voices were strong and sure. Robert and Catherine wept, but they were tears of joy as well as sorrow, joy that their daughter had found love, sorrow that their son was not there to see it. But Beatrice had placed a photograph of Samuel on the front pew, and throughout the ceremony she glanced at it, as though including him in the celebration. After the wedding, there was a small reception at the shop with cake and champagne, music and dancing. Xavier danced with Beatrice, holding her close, and he whispered in her ear, I love you, Mrs. Frost. I love you too, Beatrice whispered back, and she was radiant, glowing with happiness. They moved into a small house not far from the shop, a 2-bedroom cottage with a garden and a front porch. It was modest, but it was theirs, and they filled it with love and laughter. Xavier continued to work at the shop, and he proved to be a natural businessman with an instinct for what customers wanted and a talent for negotiation. The shop thrived under his and Robert's management, and they were able to expand, hiring additional staff and stocking a wider range of goods. Beatrice threw herself into making their house a home, sewing curtains and planting flowers, learning to cook new dishes and hosting dinners for friends and family. She also started a small lending library, just as she had dreamed, setting aside a corner of the shop for books that people could borrow for a small fee. It was a success, popular with miners and families alike, and Beatrice took great pride in it, knowing that Samuel would have approved. In the fall of 1879, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant, and the news filled Xavier with a joy he had never known. He was going to be a father. He was going to have a family of his own. He treated Beatrice like she was made of glass, fussing over her and insisting she rest, and she laughed at him but let him fuss, because she knew it came from love. Their son was born in May of 1880, a healthy baby with dark hair and Xavier's eyes. They named him Samuel, in honor of the brother Beatrice had lost, and when she held him for the first time, she wept. But they were tears of joy, of love, of gratitude. She looked at Xavier, and she said, "He is here. Our Samuel is here, and I know my brother would be so happy." Xavier kissed her forehead, his own eyes wet. "He would be," he agreed, "and he would be proud of you, of us, of the life we have built." Raising Samuel was an adventure. He was a curious, energetic child, always getting into things, always asking questions. Xavier taught him to ride when he was old enough, taking him out to the ranches on the outskirts of the city, and Beatrice taught him to read, spending hours with him in the library she had created. They told him stories about his uncle, about the man he was named after, and Samuel listened with wide eyes, soaking up every word. In 1882, they had a daughter, a little girl with Beatrice's dark hair and delicate features. They named her Catherine after Beatrice's mother, and she was sweet and gentle, the opposite of her boisterous brother. The two children were inseparable, just as Beatrice and Samuel had been, and watching them together filled Beatrice with both joy and a bittersweet ache. The years passed, and the shop continued to prosper. Robert eventually retired, handing over full control to Xavier and Beatrice, and he and Catherine moved to a smaller place near the ocean, where they could spend their days in peace. Robert's health was failing, the grief of losing Samuel having taken a toll, but he lived long enough to see his grandchildren grow, to know that his legacy was secure. Xavier never forgot the day he found Beatrice in the cemetery, sitting beside her brother's grave. It had been a turning point in his life, the moment when everything changed. He had been drifting before that, moving from job to job, town to town, never putting down roots. But Beatrice had changed him. She had given him a reason to stay, a reason to build something lasting. They visited Samuel's grave often, bringing the children as they grew older, teaching them to respect and remember the uncle they had never met. Beatrice would talk to Samuel, telling him about the children, about the shop, about the life she and Xavier had created. And Xavier would stand beside her, his hand in hers, and he would silently thank Samuel for the gift of his sister, for the love that had transformed Xavier's life. In 1885, when young Samuel was 5 and Catherine was 3, they had another child, a boy they named Robert after Beatrice's father. Robert Sr. was in poor health by then, his heart weak, and the naming of his grandson brought him great comfort. He died peacefully in his sleep a few months later, with Catherine by his side, and they buried him next to Samuel in the cemetery on the hill. Beatrice grieved, but it was different this time. She was older, stronger, more resilient. She had Xavier and the children, and she had learned that grief and joy could exist side by side, that loss did not negate love. She cried at her father's funeral, but she also smiled, remembering the good times, the lessons he had taught her, the love he had shown. Xavier was her rock, just as he had been from the beginning. He held her when she needed to be held, listened when she needed to talk, and gave her space when she needed to be alone. He understood her in a way no one else did, understood the shape of her grief and the depth of her love, and she was grateful for him every single day. Catherine, Beatrice's mother, moved in with them after Robert's death, and she became a beloved presence in the household, helping with the children and the house, sharing stories of the past. She lived for another 10 years, long enough to see all 3 of her grandchildren grow into bright, capable young people. And when she died in 1895, it was peacefully, surrounded by family. By then, Samuel was 15, Catherine was 13, and Robert was 10. They were good children, kind and hard-working, and they carried within them the legacy of the family that had come before. Young Samuel had his uncle's passion for justice and was talking about becoming a lawyer, just as his uncle had dreamed. Catherine had her grandmother's love of teaching and was already helping younger children learn to read. Robert had inherited Xavier's practical skills and was learning the business of the shop, showing a talent for it. Xavier and Beatrice, now in their 40s, looked at their children with pride and amazement. They had built something beautiful, something lasting. The grief that had brought them together had not been erased, but it had been transformed, woven into the fabric of their lives in a way that gave it meaning. The shop continued to thrive into the new century, adapting to the changing times. San Francisco was growing and changing, becoming more modern, more connected to the rest of the world. Xavier and Beatrice adapted with it, adding new products, new services, always staying one step ahead. In 1900, when young Samuel graduated from law school, top of his class, Xavier and Beatrice sat in the audience and wept with pride. Samuel had done it. He had fulfilled his uncle's dream, had become the lawyer his uncle had wanted to be. And afterward, when Samuel thanked them for their support, for believing in him, Xavier said, "You did this yourself, son. Your uncle would be so proud." "I know," Samuel said, and his eyes were bright. "I feel him with me sometimes, like he is cheering me on. Is that strange?" "Not strange at all," Beatrice said, pulling her son into a hug. "He is with us always, in you, in me, in all of us. Love does not die. It just changes form." Catherine married in 1902, a young teacher she had met at a church social, and the wedding was a joyful affair. Beatrice cried, of course, but they were happy tears, tears of a mother watching her daughter begin her own journey. Xavier walked Catherine down the aisle, and when he placed her hand in her husband's, he said, "Take care of her. She is precious." "I will, sir," the young man said solemnly. "I promise." Robert took over the shop in 1905 when Xavier decided it was time to step back and enjoy his later years. Robert was 35 by then, married with children of his own, and he ran the shop with the same integrity and care that Xavier and Beatrice had. It was in good hands. Xavier and Beatrice bought a small ranch outside the city, a place with rolling hills and open sky, and they spent their days there, enjoying the peace and quiet. Xavier taught his grandchildren to ride, just as he had taught his children, and Beatrice tended a garden, growing vegetables and flowers. They took long walks in the evenings, holding hands, talking about everything and nothing, just as they had in the early days of their courtship. They visited Samuel's grave less often now, their bodies no longer as spry as they once had been. But when they did, they brought flowers and stories, updates on the family, on the life that had grown from the seeds of grief. One spring day in 1910, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset over the hills, Beatrice turned to Xavier and said, "I've been thinking about the day we met." "So have I," Xavier said, squeezing her hand. "I was so lost," Beatrice said. "I thought my life was over. I thought I would never be happy again. And then you appeared, this stranger who had no reason to stop, no reason to care. But you did. You sat with me, and you listened, and you made me believe that I could survive." "You would have survived anyway," Xavier said. "You are stronger than you think." "Maybe," Beatrice said, "but I do not think I would have lived. Not really. I would have gone through the motions, but I would not have felt anything. You taught me how to live again, Xavier. You gave me back my life." "And you gave me mine," Xavier said. "I was drifting before I met you. I had no anchor, no purpose. You gave me all of that. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning." "We saved each other," Beatrice said softly. "We did," Xavier agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to pink to purple, and then Beatrice said, "Do you think Samuel knows? Do you think he knows how happy we are?" "I think he does," Xavier said. "I think he is happy for us." "I hope so," Beatrice said, "because I want him to know that his death was not in vain. I want him to know that his life mattered, that he mattered. and that because of him, because of the grief that brought you to me, we created something beautiful, a family, a legacy, love that will last long after we are gone. He knows, Xavier said with certainty. Wherever he is, he knows. They grew old together, Xavier and Beatrice, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by the years and the trials they had faced together. They had weathered loss and grief, joy and triumph, and through it all, they had held fast to each other. In 1915, on a crisp autumn morning, Xavier woke to find Beatrice still asleep beside him. He watched her for a moment, her face peaceful, and he felt a surge of love so strong it nearly took his breath away. She was 67 years old, and to him, she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He rose quietly so as not to wake her and went to make coffee. When he returned with 2 cups, she was awake, smiling at him with the same warmth she had shown him for more than 35 years. "Good morning, my love," she said. "Good morning," Xavier replied, handing her a cup. They drank their coffee in bed, talking about their plans for the day, about the grandchildren who were coming to visit that afternoon, about the new foal that had been born in the barn. It was an ordinary morning, the kind they had shared thousands of times before, and yet it felt precious, a gift. That evening, after the grandchildren had gone home and the house was quiet, Xavier and Beatrice sat on the porch again, wrapped in blankets against the chill. The stars were coming out, bright and clear, and Beatrice pointed to one that seemed to shine brighter than the rest. "Look," she said. "That is Samuel, I'm sure of it." Xavier looked up and he smiled. "Maybe it is," he said. "I think he is watching over us," Beatrice said. "I think he always has been, and I think he is glad that we found each other." "I am glad too," Xavier said, pulling her close. "Every single day I am glad." They sat like that until the stars filled the sky. 2 people who had found each other in the midst of grief and had built a life that was richer and fuller than either of them could have imagined. They had loved deeply, lived fully, and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. When Xavier died in 1920 at the age of 68, it was peacefully, in his sleep, with Beatrice beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, and though she grieved, she did not despair. She knew that death was not the end, that love continued beyond the grave, just as her love for Samuel had continued, just as Xavier's love for his sister had continued. Beatrice lived for another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories of Xavier and Samuel, of the life they had all shared. She made them promise to remember, to carry forward the lessons of love and resilience, of courage and compassion. And when Beatrice died in 1925, at the age of 77, she was laid to rest beside Xavier in the cemetery on the hill, not far from Samuel's grave. The headstone read, "Beatrice Andrews Frost, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, 1848-1925. Next to it was Xavier Frost, beloved husband, father, grandfather, 1852-1920. Their children made sure that the graves were always tended, that flowers were always fresh, that the memory of Xavier and Beatrice lived on. And in the years that followed, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would come to the cemetery and hear the story of how their grandparents had met, how a cowboy had found a woman lost in grief and had sat with her through the hardest hours, how that act of kindness had blossomed into a love that had changed both their lives forever. The shop on Market Street continued to operate for many years, passed down through the generations, and above the door, a small plaque was installed, Andrews and Frost, established 1855. It was a testament to the family that had built it, to the love and hard work that had sustained it, to the legacy of 2 people who had found each other when they needed it most. And in the evenings, when the fog rolled in from the bay and the city grew quiet, some people swore they could see 2 figures walking hand in hand through the streets of San Francisco. An older couple with faces full of love, still together, still holding on to each other, even in death. It was a story that became part of the fabric of the city, a reminder that love endures, that grief can be transformed, that even in the darkest moments, there is hope. The years turned into decades, and the 20th century brought changes that Xavier and Beatrice could never have imagined. But their descendants carried their values forward, teaching their own children about kindness and resilience, about the importance of sitting with someone in their pain, about the power of love to heal and transform. Young Samuel, who became a successful lawyer and advocate for the poor, named his first son Xavier, ensuring that his father's name lived on. Catherine, who became a beloved teacher, started a scholarship fund in her mother's name, helping young women pursue their dreams. Robert, who ran the shop until his own retirement, made sure that the lending library his mother had started continued to serve the community, adding to it over the years until it became a full-fledged public library branch. The story of Xavier and Beatrice became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations, a touchstone for what was possible when two people chose to love each other through both joy and sorrow. It was a story that reminded them that life was precious, that every moment mattered, that the connections we make with others are what give our lives meaning. In 1975, on the 100th anniversary of Samuel Andrews' death, the family gathered at the cemetery for a memorial. By then, the original Andrews Dry Goods had been replaced by a modern building, and San Francisco had grown into a sprawling metropolis, barely recognizable from the rough-and-tumble city of the Gold Rush era. But the cemetery remained, a pocket of quiet in the midst of the urban sprawl, and the graves of Samuel, Xavier, and Beatrice were still there, still tended by descendants who remembered. One of Beatrice's great-great-granddaughters, a young woman named Sarah, stood before the three graves and read aloud from a letter that Beatrice had written late in her life, a letter that had been preserved by the family. In it, Beatrice had written, "To my children and their children and all who come after, I want you to know that love is the most powerful force in the world. It can survive death, transcend time, and transform even the deepest grief into something beautiful. When I lost my brother Samuel, I thought my life was over. But then Xavier appeared, a stranger who became my dearest friend and then my husband, and he showed me that life goes on, that joy is still possible, that love can bloom even in the darkest soil. We built a life together that was rich and full, and we did it by choosing each other every single day, through good times and bad. I hope that you will do the same. I hope that you will love deeply, live fully, and never give up, no matter how hard things get. And I hope that you will remember us, not with sadness, but with gratitude for the love we shared and the legacy we left behind. We are all connected across time and space by the bonds of family and love. Honor those bonds, cherish them, and pass them on to those who come after you." When Sarah finished reading, there was not a dry eye among the gathered family members. They stood together, young and old descendants of Xavier and Beatrice, and they felt the weight of the legacy they carried, the responsibility to honor the love that had started it all. As the sun set over San Francisco that evening, casting long shadows across the cemetery, the family dispersed, returning to their own lives, their own loves, their own challenges. But they carried with them the story of Xavier and Beatrice, the cowboy and the woman lost in grief, who had found each other and built something that lasted long after they were gone. And in that way, Xavier and Beatrice lived on, not just in memory, but in the lives of all those they had touched, in the values they had instilled, in the love they had shared. They had started with grief, with loss, with the hardest hours of human experience, but they had transformed it into something lasting and beautiful, something that would endure as long as there were people to remember them. Their story was proof that even in the darkest moments there is light to be found, that even when we are lost, someone might appear to sit with us, to hold our hand, to remind us that we are not alone, and that love, true love, is not just about the easy times, but about showing up for each other when things are hard, about sitting through the difficult hours, about choosing each other again and again and again. Xavier Frost had been a cowboy, a man who worked with his hands and knew the value of honest labor. Beatrice Andrews had been a shopkeeper's daughter, a woman who understood loss and resilience. Together, they had created something greater than either of them could have been alone. They had built a family, a business, a legacy of love that spanned generations. And it had all started on that day in September 1878, when a cowboy rode into a cemetery and saw a woman sitting beside a grave, lost in her grief. He could have ridden past, he could have looked away, but he did not. He stopped. He sat down beside her, and in doing so, he changed both their lives forever. That was the power of compassion, of kindness, of simply being present for another human being in their moment of need. It was a lesson that Xavier and Beatrice had learned and lived, a lesson they had passed down to their children and grandchildren, a lesson that continued to resonate through the years. As the 21st century dawned, the story of Xavier and Beatrice was still being told, still inspiring new generations to love deeply and live fully. Their graves in the San Francisco cemetery were still visited, still adorned with flowers, still a reminder of what was possible when two people chose to face the world together. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when they leave this earth, Xavier and Beatrice were together still, their love undiminished by death, their bond unbroken by time. They had found each other in grief, and they had built a life in joy, and that was all that mattered. That was everything. The cowboy had found her lost in grief for someone gone. He had sat with her through the hardest hours there. And from that simple act of kindness, a love story had been born that would echo through the generations, a testament to the enduring power of human connection, of compassion, of love. And that love continued on, forever and always, a bright light in the darkness, a reminder that even in our deepest pain, we are not alone, and that hope, love, and healing are always possible, if only we have the courage to reach out and hold on to each other.